Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Elliot. It's great to be back talking to you guys.
Nice to see you again. We know that our audience really enjoyed the film we did with you that we released last year. And for the audience who may or may not know, David was in the Navy and then became a commercial diver. And while he was a commercial diver in the 80s, he drowned in the ocean and had a near-death experience. So we thought we'd start out today and just ask you, David, for anyone who hasn't heard your story, for you to maybe give a brief recount and a recap of what your NDE was.
Yeah, in 1983, I drowned, just like you just described, in heavy seas, and it was a violent death for me. But I found myself in this absolute darkness that was quiet, peaceful, calm, and yet it felt like I wasn't alone, that there was more to it than just myself. And then I saw a light. I traveled into the light, and the light appeared to me as millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all of one mind and moving in unison. And from those fragments, a number of them broke away and greeted me and welcomed me home. And that was an emotional thing for me. To be welcomed home to a family that I didn't even know that existed. And we reviewed my life and reviewed it in such a way as that I got to experience my life through everyone I'd ever interacted with. And I got to see how how my interactions affected them. And it was eye-opening and awe-inspiring and very humbling all at the same time. And eventually, I even saw parts of my future in this life review. But then I was told I had to go back, and I didn't want to. I argued with what I perceived as God, and then it told me, you must return, you have a purpose. And that word purpose really resonated with me. It really, in that, after life, we have this expanded consciousness, this expanded awareness, much more so than what we have available to us in the physical realm here. And so that purpose just so resonated with my being that I understood it. And it seemed so simple and so efficient that I agreed to come back. And here I am.
So the obvious question for probably a lot of people that haven't seen your film yet is maybe what was that purpose?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. When I came back, it was so clear when I was on the other side. But as I came back into this physical body, which felt so dense and so restrictive, that clarity just started slipping away. And it was like it was escaping, it just evaporated away. And I lost the clarity of what that purpose was. So that started me on a quest, in this life to find what is this purpose, and also to find what was that love, that immense love that I felt while I was on the other side. And so, like many experiencers, I started, reading and searching, and this happened. My experience happened back in the 80s, so we didn't have the expansive internet like we have today. So it relied on, just pure research. And I realized that the purpose, coming back to your question, the purpose was more than just one single purpose. It's like in life, we go through and like, just as an example, we'll learn something. We'll learn something today. Maybe we read something that gave us a certain insight. And then later on that day, someone comes along and they'll say, oh, I really want to know about this certain thing. And you just read it. And you just glean this insight that you can now share with somebody else. Well, that's a small purpose. and those are little things like that. The people that cross our paths and the things that we can do for each other, those are all small purposes. But then there's community purposes. How can we help within our group and this and that and the other thing? And then there's shared purposes. There's a purpose that we all share of our need to learn our spiritual being and who we really are so that we can contribute authentically in our lives.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing all that. And I know one thing that Elliot and I are really fascinated about with people who have experienced near-death experiences is kind of the life before and the life after. And I remember when in your film that we did with you, you talked about being a kind of strong young man who might, if someone got in your way, you'd cut right through them. And of course, maybe that's a part of being younger. But I'm just curious if you could say a little more about what shifted after the near-death experience. How did your personality shift? And I know a part of that might be connected to the life review.
Yeah, the life review itself was the two things were that immense love and the life review. It really was startling to me, and like I said, humbling to see how everything we do, we recount after we die, and that it's like, we have this cosmic balance, and so the experience itself, especially the love in the experience, is something that you afterwards, I myself would use as a gauge in my interactions. But it wasn't immediate. I can honestly say, we're human. And so we have the old triggers that we always had, but I learned to catch myself sooner and moderate my behavior sooner. And eventually, with enough catching it and moderating it, it became more of a way of being. So my temperament changed, but it was gradual, it was gradual. And if somebody pushed one of my buttons, boy, I would still go off, but I learned to catch myself and take that breath and take a step back and to recognize that, okay, how can I deal with this better? How can I be a better person? And how can I help? And how can I be of service? Because that's a big call that happens after the experience. As many of us feel this call that we need to be of service. We need to give back,
David, another question I have is, you talk about this immense love that you experience on the other side. Did you ever find that again here after returning to your body? And if so, how? And what does that look like for you?
I'm very fortunate that I have, I've had a number of experiences, and each experience built on itself. And so I now have a very good relationship with my soul family on the other side. And so I can, in meditation and in stillness, cross that threshold and feel that love. But as far as finding it here on earth, the one thing that really helps is when I'm in pure gratitude, especially when I'm in nature and I'm in pure gratitude and I can feel that love, because it is all around us. It's everywhere. It's in everything. And it's a part of everything. In fact, it's like the universe is glued together with love. And we just don't take the time to develop the perception to be able to feel it and to be able to participate with that love. So, but the problem is we live in this human body with emotions and ego and all these things, right? And so it tends to cloud the experience. It's not as intense as it was on the other side, but we are able to perceive it. We are able to participate with it.
And I might ask you, I think we also want to ask you, you had a great piece you talk about gratitude, but before we get there, I'd love to, because you did have a second NDE, didn't you? Wondering if you'd be open to sharing a little bit about that.
It wasn't really an NDE. I guess if you were to clinically classify it, it would be a spiritually transformative experience. But I was 11 years after I'd had my first experience. I had a couple kind of bad experiences trying to share it initially. And so I had I had shut it down. I just wasn't sharing it, and I was just keeping it to myself. And in a way, it's a bit of a repression, because you're really not living your truth when you can't be wholly who you are. I'm this near-death experiencer who's trying to, get a grip on life. But when you can't do that, it represses it to a certain degree. And I've talked to some researchers, and they've told me that it's not uncommon that when someone represses their experience, that it will come bubbling back up sometime later in life. And for me, it was 11 years later. And I had come together with the spiritual group, and we were actually going to Sedona. And I had grown up, part of my childhood, I'd grown up in Sedona in the Verde Valley. And so I was very comfortable there. And they wanted to have a meditation on Bell Rock, of all places. And I knew Bell Rock from my childhood. We used to tromp around those canyons all the time. So we went to Bell Rock, and I went to a place that was familiar for me. And I sat down, and that's when I had this second experience. As I sat down and I settled into my method of meditation at the time, which was very Native American. So what I had learned in my teens from some grandmothers, they'd taught me how to go into my sacred space. And so I started those techniques. And then I heard the light. The light spoke to me. It said, return to the light. And I relived my entire near-death experience, from the drowning into the blackness, the void, seeing the light, my soul family, the life review. Only this time in the life review, I had lived an additional 11 years. And so I got to see how much that NDE had affected my life. And I didn't think I'd change that much. I had just adopted just a few tenets from the experience, what I called acceptance, tolerance, and truth. But just by accepting that, acceptance of myself, tolerance of who I am and where I am and those that cross my path, and my personal truth, by just adopting that, I got to see in those 11 years after the first experience how much it really had changed me, how much it had, and then also from the first experience, I also started, receiving messages and understandings. And after the second experience, I now heard my soul family. It was more of a conversation. It wasn't just a one-way download of information. And so that second experience it built so much more upon the first. And that's when I decided I have to be true to myself. I have to live within my truth, that I've had these experiences and this is a part of who I am. And so that second experience was another catalyst to move forward in my spiritual journey, And so that's when I started sharing the experience a little more. But even then I was guarded. I would only start out with trusted friends, but Spirit kept, needling me to share it more publicly. And it's kind of funny because that's when I built my website. Because I thought, well, a website, you can be anonymous behind the scenes, but put everything out on the web, right? There it is. I'm sharing publicly, okay, Spirit, you can leave me alone now. But, but, it doesn't work that way. It just, I made a sincere, agreement with Spirit about how I'd share it. And then suddenly people started asking me to share it. And it was like, oh, I've agreed that I would share it. So here I am.
I would love to explore a little bit more when you said you took 3 principles from the NDE. Was it tolerance, truth, something else?
Acceptance.
And acceptance. So what did those 3 things look like, or how did you implement those in your life so that by the second life review in your meditation, Spirit seemed kind of grateful or glad? It was reflected well in your life review. So what did that look like?
The thing that I was comfortable with the first one, because you have to understand, I was an engineer. I saw things kind of black and white, and suddenly I've been thrust into this other world that I had no explanation for. I didn't have any mentors to help me with it. So I took what I called acceptance, tolerance, and truth. And the acceptance was, after that life review, you knew who you were. And I came to accept that's who I was. I knew I needed a lot of work on myself, and that was a big part of integrating the experience too, was, I had to work on myself because I was this brash young man, and I needed to recognize that there are other people in this world, not just me. I was very self-involved. And so the acceptance of self really helped to calm me down quite a bit. And then tolerance. Before this experience, I didn't even know what the word tolerance meant, to tell you the truth. It was beyond me because I was so self-involved. And so I didn't have tolerance for other people. If you didn't agree with my point of view, then I would just, I'd either go around you or through you or whatever I needed to do to get to where I wanted to go because, again, I wasn't tolerant. But I learned in that life review that many people cross our paths, and many times we may not agree with their choices in life, but that's okay. They're their choices, and they can live their lives the way they are meant to be, and I can live my life the way I'm meant to be. And I can be tolerant that that's the way it is. And I can, do what I need to do and be tolerant that other people, and sometimes also tolerance also is included in where we find ourselves in life. A lot of times we're not happy with where we are in life, but I can be tolerant that this is just where I am right now, and I can change where I am, and I can move forward because I didn't want to be stagnant. I want to continue moving forward in my path. And so acceptance and tolerance, those were two biggies. They affected a lot of change. The last one, truth, was a little different because, again, I was an engineer. So before the experience, I saw everything as black and white. But within the experience, I also witnessed that there's a truth that resonates within my heart. And this truth helped me to start hearing and listening through my heart for those truths. And when I say listening to my heart, a lot of times, we spend most of our time in our mind with our cognitive abilities, okay? But if we can temper some of that with listening through our heart, because our heart's a receiver as well. So I really believe that our consciousness is non-local and that we have many receptors, okay? And our mind is great for rational thinking and planning and doing those things. But if we do it in concert with listening to a receptor as large as our heart, then we start to hear a greater resonance and we get to hear truth on a different level. And so that really changed a lot. And I didn't recognize how much it had changed, but truth became really paramount in my life, that I wanted to live by my truth. And that's what I mean by my truth, is by listening to my heart.
And how do you listen through your heart? It sounds like maybe a simple question, but
I know, right? It sounds simple. It sounds really easy, but it takes a little bit of discipline and practice at first, just like a meditation practice would, is to, the way I kind of experience is I actually, it feels like my heart is opening up. And when I do that, then when someone asks me a question, just like you're asking, Elliot, then a lot of times that information is beyond me. The information comes to me more so than just logically thinking it through. Okay. And it's not sequential. It actually comes, more organically.
I also love, David, you had such a beautiful piece talking about gratitude. And we noticed on the film, a lot of people were making comments about that. I think it really touches people when you talk about it like that from such a grounded experience, especially considering, and the audience may not know, that you grappled with cancer, which was something you had seen in your initial near-death experience. And you talked about really cultivating this practice of gratitude, not just for the good that's happening in life, but also even for what's difficult and hard. And wondering if you could just speak a little bit about that and how you're still practicing that today.
Yeah, it's part of my morning ritual, you might say. I have a morning practice where before I even put my feet on the floor, I start to give thanks. Because gratitude, when you think about it, pure gratitude, where you're grateful for everything in your life. When you're grateful for everything in your life, you suddenly, your mental me kind of steps aside, and you actually step into a state of grace, into a state of stillness where your gratitude is takes on more of a divine nature. All right, because when we're grateful for everything, we're inclusive, and we become curious. We become the explorer of our own life. And gratitude, because we're seeking truth. We come back to truth too. See, it's all interrelated, but that gratitude is a pure essence. When we can be grateful for everything, it gives us that ability to see clearly. Clear vision, the Buddhists call it clear vision. But gratitude is a great way to achieve that. But you have to be sincere. It has to come from your heart. You have to put the ego aside, and you have to say, I'm grateful for everything that's going on in my life. I may be going through some troubles over here, but I also have some great things that are happening over here. But together, I can be present for all of it, So gratitude is an amazing tool that we can use, in our own spiritual toolbox to be able to move forward and to gain and glean these insights from our higher nature.
I also think about just with near-death experiences, when I tune into gratitude, it's a way of just, like you said, it stops the mental narrative. It kind of pulls you out. It pulls me out of, just the day to day, like, oh, I wish this was different, or what's this? We can so focus on what's hard or difficult or what was not good. But when we pause and just take it as a whole, it's like, wow, grateful to be alive, grateful for this opportunity, this learning experience to be in this human body. It does like shift something, which is pretty incredible.
Exactly, Jesse. That's it. Exactly. That's perfect. That's that pure essence of gratitude. And you can feel that there's something divine about it. There's something divine when you step aside from the angst or even the joy, when you step aside from it, it becomes more of a pure state of wonder. And wonder is that curiosity and seeking, that really helps, I think, a lot of times in our path.
I want to dig in a little bit deeper, David, because this is a pretty radical concept. So one, it sounds like you got this experience of gratitude during your NDE, right? And two, how can you be grateful when you are facing something really difficult, like cancer or breakups, divorces, the loss of a child? It's so overwhelming. It seems so hard to kind of look at that when you're in it. And do you say like, thank you to the universe or to God for that experience because it helps us grow? Or is it just gratitude for being alive? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, Elliot, you're right. I mean, when it hits the fan, and for me, I cultivated this really when I was going through stage 4 lung and bone cancer that it ate away part of my spine. I had a prognosis of only going to be able to live for another 6 or 8 weeks. And, and so that prognosis was so severe that, and many cancer patients would tell you the same thing, that it puts you in a place of clarity where you can see clearer. But a lot of times when it's hitting the fan, we immediately delve into the circumstances. Okay. And we take the circumstances and we take it apart and we put it together and we take it apart and we put it together, and that's what happens when we're going through, emotional grief and that sort of stuff. So what this type of gratitude does is it lifts us above the circumstances a little bit. Okay. So that we can see clearer, so that we can move forward with empowerment instead of with angst and with distress and with, different ways. So it's, and a lot of people I had a lot of people that thought, Dave, you're nuts. Why are you grateful? But just as an example, I had a friend of mine. Okay. I was just diagnosed with stage 4 lung and bone cancer. Really bad prognosis. Doctors weren't even going to treat me. They were just going to make me comfortable and let me die. And a friend of mine shipped me across the country, shipped me a box of professional boxing gloves. And because he said, you're in the fight of your life, here's, and so he sent them as a symbol, put on the gloves, get fighting, and it was like, God bless you. I really thank you, but that's not the way I'm going to approach it because I don't see it as a fight. It's just simply an obstacle that I can, if I seek the solutions, I'll be able to overcome it. But I don't have to think of it as a battle. I don't have to think of it as a war. It's not something that I have to kill. It's something that I have to just simply overcome. And so that allows my heart to be gentle, to be soft. A soft heart is actually more powerful than a rigid mind. So I used that as my focus. Okay. So it's not so much where we tie ourselves up with the circumstances. Instead, the gratitude allows us to rise above the circumstances so that we can see clearer and move with empowerment. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does. I love that. Yeah, it's hard, but I'm sure like for you, it's a meditation, it's a practice, and you build that skill and that muscle memory of a soft, open heart and with gratitude so that when the big stuff hits, you're able to do that more.
Yeah, and you're right. Because I had the near-death experience in 83, I had the second experience in 94, I had the cancer, didn't happen until 2000. So, and I had a number of smaller spiritual experiences along the way, which all built upon each other that gave me the insights I needed to be able to then develop this practice of gratitude. But now I'm at a point where I can share what I've learned. But and I make it sound very simple, but it was a long journey. I'm not going to, say that it wasn't. It was a long journey, and I had to learn, and I had to stumble, and I had to fall down, and I had to get myself back up. So, yeah. But isn't that life for everybody? I mean, we all have obstacles,
One question we saw our audience people would ask, so we thought maybe we'd ask you here now. Some people were very curious because in the film you mentioned using gratitude and Western medicine and also some alternative forms of medicine or treatment modalities. A lot of people, I think some people have cancer or loved ones, so they were wondering, I don't know if you'd care to share with some of the other modalities you use to overcome cancer.
I saw those comments, and I sent links to my website for them to be able to enjoy, to see, because I had forgotten. I had my website's gone through a number of revisions over the years, and this last revision I forgot to put the cancer stuff up there, so people were going on my website looking, what did he do for the cancer, and but now it's up there because thanks to your the people listening to your or watching your movie. But I used a number of holistic approaches, but before I found the approaches that worked for me, I used my own guidance. We all have inner guidance, what feels right. You call it gut instinct, whatever, but we all have the ability to discern what's good for us. And it's a knowing, we all have that ability. you can call it whatever you want, but because I had a lot of friends in, at this point, because I'd gone through such a spiritual journey, I kind of allowed myself to be involved in much more spiritual circles. And so I had a lot of people that had a lot of holistic approaches that they were, suggesting. And some of them were a little off base, but there's also, like, I started using what's called SEACT. And this worked for me. It's an old Ojibwe remedy for cancers, and it's made up of 4 roots, and you make a tea out of it. It tastes like dirt, but when I drank it, there's certain things that when you drink it, it just feels like, that's just what I need, And so the first time I tried it, because it just, my little guidance bell started ringing, like, SEACT. So I tried it. And when I drank it, it was like, oh my gosh, that feels perfect. That's exactly what I need. But I had to try it first, to really get the physical feeling of, that feels right. And so that was one thing that I used particularly. But I like to caution people, what worked for me may not necessarily be the perfect thing for you, and to use your inner guidance. So using, some logic, like jumping up and down on a trampoline for someone with a broken spine is probably not a good idea. And then, so some logic, but also using, your intuitive sense, your gut, your knowing, of what feels right for you. Because I used a number of things. There was a supplement that I used that helped my immune system, because my therapy was these holistic approaches, but also I used traditional medicine, and traditional medicine had wiped out my immune system. So I went looking for something holistic that would boost my immune system back up. So it's taking the circumstances that you're in, rising above it, use your guidance and clarity to pick what is really going to help you, what really is there to benefit you. And then a big thing that I did that I really don't talk a lot about is visualization, and seeing myself beyond the cancer, seeing who I would be afterwards, and visualizing that, and then not only just visualizing it, but then start living it while you're going through the cancer, while you're going through your treatment. Start living your life beyond cancer.
How do you live your life beyond cancer while you're still in it? Like,
I was in a new relationship with, you've met my wife, Cindy. We were in a new relationship, and we started planning our future. We started looking for a house. We started living our life beyond cancer. So yeah, we put a vision together. We called it our 10-year plan. And then at 10 years, she wanted a re-up, so.
I was just about to kind of ask you or share, because I've been reading some Joe Dispenza lately, and he talks a lot. I don't know if you know him, but he healed himself from like 6 or 7 vertebrae that were crushed when he was doing in a cycling accident in his 20s. And his surgeons were like, you're going to be paralyzed the rest of your life. You need a full spinal fusion. And he thought, kind of like you, he listened to his intuition. He said, I think I can heal this myself. And so for 2 months, he did pretty intensive visualizations, like visualizing each vertebra healing. And 2 months, he got up, walked out, never had back issues the rest of his life. And he made a deal with himself. If I heal myself, I'll dedicate the rest of my life to studying the mind-body connection. And now he's pretty popular and all these books. And he talks about like the placebo effect and all these studies, because he was very interested in spontaneous healings throughout the world. And so those are some components he writes about that I've thought about, is like, in an illness or injury. It's like visualization. It's actually thinking about the future, and embodying it. And all these kind of techniques, and which is rooted in the power of our mind, which can even be more powerful than matter or our physical bodies. So it's kind of fascinating, and it's cool to hear that you intuitively use some of those techniques.
Yeah, I agree totally with that whole concept, because I believe that our mind has the ability to send messages to ourselves to tell it that, I'm going to overcome this. And that I used also a visualization of seeing a feather wiping the cancer away a little at a time, just wearing it down with a feather. Because I was I worked in healthcare for a while there. And so I realized that to try to imagine the cancer cell just being gone would be actually not beneficial, because the body's always seeking homeostasis, balance. Okay. And to suddenly create a void in your body would be detrimental, actually. So I envisioned wearing the cancer away with a feather. And that was a visualization that I would use a lot. But what I did is once they had a good imagery of the cancer, I wanted to see it so that I could put that visualization together, so that I could then say, okay, I know what the cancer looks like, and here I can start making it disappear.
Well, something interesting, we were talking about comments in the comment sections. And Elliot and I, obviously, we're just new with this channel. It's about 8 months, 9 months old. We really love near-death experiences. We're fascinated about it. I studied comparative religion in undergrad, also in graduate school, along with philosophy and depth psychology. We both have a background we're both marriage and family therapists. So we love this intersection of therapy, psychology with the spiritual realms. That's why people like Carl Jung were big fans. I believe people like Carl Jung had a great concept of what God, source, the numinous realm of the archetypes are. So something we've been noticing, and to be honest, are a little frustrated about, is somebody might watch a film like yours, and they listen to this 30-minute film of your whole experience, and then their simple comment is, well, he didn't see Jesus Christ, and I didn't hear Jesus mentioned, this is crazy or what. And we just notice a huge part of our audience obviously must be Christian. But I'm just curious, we're kind of curious, how do you hold that? Or as you share your experience, or if you're online doing podcasts, or how do you interact? Because on the one hand, compared to a lot of kind of more nihilistic atheists, secular people, atheists, science people who are just like, wow, this is just, because you also get the comments that this is brain chemistry as you die, or it's morphine, and this is just a hallucination. You're crazy. So in a way, we love the folks who are more open to the spiritual realms or the other side, but can be this real dogmatism that happens. And just curious how you deal with that and what your own journey has been around that.
I honor it. Because, again, remember tolerance, where I can be with other people and their choices and their beliefs. I just honor what their beliefs are, and God, and I bless them. All right. But it's kind of interesting, because I have a number of, in fact, just today I had a client that was an atheist, and we're still able to talk about spiritual nature, because because I was introducing him to some meditation. And so I find it interesting that a lot of we'll identify ourselves in such a certain way, but then there's always a doorway that can be opened, And so I just honor, this is where they are. Doesn't mean they're going to stay in that position. It doesn't mean, maybe they are going to stay in. Maybe that's their choice. That's their choice. And God bless. I don't. It's another thing I've struggled with in my life, because I was very critical. I was very single focused before my experience. So after the experience, one thing that I've struggled with most of my life is judgment, and you know, and trying to use discernment instead of judgment is but you know, we're human, we all fall into judgment because it's so big in our culture, that you know. But you know what, a lot of people, yeah, I've heard before, you know, haven't mentioned Jesus, but to me Jesus was part of that, because all those fragments, I perceived that was God. That was, and you can call it whatever you want. And a lot of times I really feel like in humanity, we get trapped putting labels on things, you know, this is this and this is that. When I talk about my soul family, a lot of times I get questions about, well, are they angels? Well, I could see where people would perceive them as angels. Yes. You know, when I died, I turned into a fragment of light myself. What was I? Did I transition into my angelness? You know, so I just, terms and titles and labels are something that I don't allow myself to get caught up on. So I just honor, this is the way you view it, this is the way you see it, and God bless, you know.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be a desire to be in a dialogue or discuss it. It would be more of just accepting that this is how they perceive it, or yeah, right. I think all the mystics and saints seem to indicate that the language is so limited compared to the experience itself of consciousness. It's hard for humans to have these conversations on some level.
I would agree with that 100%. Because it is. And that's one of the first challenges that people have after they have these experiences is how do you describe it? You know, you've just had something otherworldly happen to you, you know, where's the vocabulary? We don't have a vocabulary. You have to listen to other experiencers in order to sometimes build that vocabulary. Oh, a life review. That's a good term for that, you know, things like that, you know. Like at first, I relived my life. Holy cow, you know, but I didn't have a term life review for it, you know. So, and the integration process is lifelong. It's not an overnight thing. I participate in a lot of retreats for near-death experiencers. And that's something that we've all come to agree on, that the integration process, you know, a lot of the researchers say, oh, integration is 7 to 14 years, you know. I think that's the bulk of it. But then there's a lot of little integration that happens even beyond that, you know. So it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's something that Jesse and I have been drawn to about near-death experience stories, testimonies, is it's so authentic and it's so unique and it's different. It defies categorization or labels in a sense. And I think that's what we bump into with this channel and the comments is historical religion is just kind of easier to grasp. You know, there's a holy book, there's scripture, there's saints. So that's the gospel, that's the truth. And then if someone dies, comes back, and there's some of that, but it's too threatening. So, but I think that happens in every religion. And I think it's something that we think is an emerging with medical science, and more and more of these stories are so powerful and such messages of hope. You came back, you're teaching us and talking to us and our audience about gratitude and these practices that are so amazing. So appreciate all of that.
Yeah, I got into a discussion with one of a mentor that I spent 2 summers with was a Native American shaman. And because in my early days in Arizona, the grandmothers taught me how to find my sacred space. And so that really felt, after my near-death experience, that really felt true. That really felt like, wow, that's a spiritual belief that I could, maybe learn more from. And so I connected with this gentleman, and we got into some great discussion because there were certain parts of his belief that just didn't ring true to me, even though I really honored his spiritual belief and his spiritual journey. And I would take 99% of it, but there were some elements in there that we could debate, and so we would, of course, we would do it over a spiritual centering circle of sorts, but we would talk about it and say, well, in my, we go to our ancestors and we don't come back, and there's, that's the other side. And I would say, yeah, but I believe that we can come back. We can believe, so reincarnation. And so, there's different elements of spirituality that we don't really understand, but we can debate it, and we can talk about it, and let's put it out on the table, and examine it. But we don't know. Even those of us that have had this near-death experience, we've only looked through a little window, and the same thing with the mystics and the saints. They've come back and they are in a physical form, so they only have a certain amount of cognitive ability to be able to relate what it is that they understand. And so we're getting these bits and pieces, and sometimes they don't fit together. It's not a perfect puzzle. So, I think that's part of being human, is the exploration and working and learning, and what feels right to you, and what, so when people ask me, like, what's your, so what do you follow? What's your spiritual, what path do you follow? And I say, I take a little bit of what I've learned from different religions, and I have my own conglomerate of belief, that I've put together, that I love to live by.
What's the age-old metaphor, right, of the elephant? If someone grabs a tail, someone grabs it is such we can't even imagine, like you said, we're just getting little peaks of something that's really infinite and beyond all conceptualization. And I think that's one of the coolest things about near-death experiences, is you just have all these people. No two NDEs are alike, really. They're all different flavors, different things. There may be some common themes, but it's kind of just, it does have a tendency to shake our, like, any rigid understanding of what the afterlife is or what the soul is. It's kind of just opens up of, like, oh, that person's experience. Was like that, this person's experience like that. And luckily, the themes of feeling like you're coming home, of unconditional love, of light, there's some themes that are so common that we have to assume that's at the bedrock, at the foundation of it. But before we ended, I wanted to ask one more question, which is, so people can find you on your website, and what kind of work do you do with people? Is it kind of coaching? Is it spiritual healing? Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started out as a spiritual counselor and eventually a coach, but I've kind of put that aside. What I do now is the energetic, it's white light energy healing, or white light energy sessions, I call it. But it works with not just physical healing, because a lot of times, what's affecting us physically is also, there's a mental component, there's emotional component, there's a spiritual component. And so my white light energy work is it's kind of like a crossbreed of a little bit of counsel work and then energy work. And I do that. I really enjoy it because I get to work with people. But I also do a podcast. It's on YouTube under my name, Dave's Dharma Talks, but it's called Contemplative Living. So every Sunday morning, I do a very short 15 minutes or less, a little podcast about a certain subject for spiritual transformation, using contemplative living as the root.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us today. I think that's a perfect place to stop. And yeah, just so wonderful to hear everything you have to say from your experiences. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me again, Jesse, Elliot. You guys are great. I think you're doing an amazing job with your new venture here. 8 months out, and I think you've touched a lot of people. You can tell by the numbers.
Yeah. Thanks, David. We'll see you around. Yeah. Take care. Talk soon.